today I'm here to talk to you about the Nikon D7100. Obviously I'm not holding the D7100 in my hand, although I hope that when it first goes to the stores I'll be doing another review with the D7100 in my hand and showing you some sample pictures. The reason why I decided to do this video is because I've been watching some of the videos, as I think you have too, and a lot of the videos talk about some of the obvious differences, but sometimes they don't explain what those differences mean between the D7100 and the D7000. And the reason why I think I can explain some of those differences and tell you if they're significant or not is because I also own the D800, and what I noticed is that the D800 has a lot of the new features that the D7100 has. So I look at it like a hybrid between my D7000, my 16 megapixel camera, and my D800, which is my 36 megapixel camera. Of course, the D7100 is a newer camera, and believe it or not, it has some features that even my D800 doesn't have. So clearly technology keeps moving. The D800 is almost a year old, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video, because it really surprised me that the D7100 not only is it superior to the D7000, it has a lot of advantages versus the D300s. As a matter of fact, a lot of the disadvantages that the D7000 had versus the D300s, they've been able to address them in the D7100. Additionally, I also compare it with the D600. And the reason why I do that is because I think a lot of people are evaluating right now what to do. Should I upgrade, let's say, from a D90, which I used to have before the D7000, or should I upgrade from a D300 or a D300s to a 7100, or even from the D7000? Or some people are evaluating, well, is it time to go full frame? And if it is, should I go D600 or D800? One of the beauties of the D7100, even though it hasn't been launched yet, is its price. I mean, I was very surprised with the price of this camera. And as you will see in a second, you will see why. I used to say the D7000 is the best camera you can get under $1,000. Because obviously now that it's not new, you can get with a lot of discounts under $1,000. I would say the D7100 is definitely the best camera you can get under $1,200, or I believe maybe they have it on special for $1,100. I'm just amazed how you have a D800 that is $3,000 and a D4 is $6,000, and all these cameras that are at least $2,000, and they just launched this amazing camera for about half of the price. So what this video is about is more to explain the differences that are that are shown here in the specs, because one thing is to read specs or specifications and something else is to use them or not use them. And what I did here is I have the D300s, the D7000, the D7100, which is the one that we're most interested in. I also have the D600 and the D800. And the reason why I'm also showing the D600 and the D800 is because I'm very impressed with some of the features that they've added to the D7100, because in some cases they're not only better than this D600, which is twice the price, but even better than the D800, which is triple the price. So this is something that really surprises me, all the pro features that they've added to the D7100. So let me go through some of these. Some of them are relatively obvious, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about them, like the megapixels. As we know, the D300s was 12, this one is 24. Very similar to the same as the D600. Now the sensor size, you can see that it still a smaller sensor size as the full frame cameras, and that's one of the reasons why they are less expensive. So, but there is really no difference in the sensor size between these cameras. That's not where the advantages are. The format, the FX. So let's talk about the first significant difference, which is the storage media. The D300s had compact flash, which is usually what professional cameras always used, but it only had one slot. In the case of the D7000, it has two slots for SD cards. Originally, I was frustrated with the SD cards because they were slower than the CF cards, the compact flash cards. So if you're doing, you know, for example, in burst mode, you're doing birds in flight or sports, you really want those cards that can write at fast speed. Now, things have changed quite a bit. The SD cards are not only as fast as the compact flash, but they are less expensive. So and the prices have gone down tremendously. So now I actually find it advantageous to have SD cards. Of course, for people that already have compact flash cards, they probably would rather have a compact flash and an SD card like the D800 so they can take advantage of the two. But the prices have gone down so much that, you know, it's a different situation. So the SD cards, again, I don't see them as an advantage, but I don't see them as a disadvantage anymore. Now here is where the first major difference is. So the D300s was a lot faster. It had 7 frames per second. The D7000 had 6 frames per second. Now the D300s could go up to 8 frames per second with a battery pack. The D7000 with a battery pack could only go to 8 frames per second. The D7100 can go to 6 frames per second in the DX mode, but if you go, and I'm going to call it the super crop mode, the additional 1.3 crop factor, you can go to 7 frames per second. So, you know, in the super crop factor is now equivalent to the D300s, although the D300s, because of the battery pack, could go 1 frame per second more. So let's just give the edge to the D300s. What I find surprising is that even though the D600 is also 24 megapixels, because clearly the more megapixels is what is restricting these cameras to go a lot faster. I mean, it's happening not only to Nikon, but Canon also has the same situation. And as you can see, the D800 with the 36 megapixels has gone down to 4 frames per second. The D700 used to be, or is, 7 frames per second. So there is clearly a trade-off. Now what I find interesting is that the D7100 has faster continuous shooting than the D600, and that you can even go to 7. So that's an advantage for the D7100. Now for me, one of the things that I'm most curious about with the D7100 is how it handles at high ISO. The reason I used to have a D90, and when the D7000 first came out, I was undecided between the D7000 and the D300s. And what made me go for the D7000, in addition to obviously a price advantage, was how it handled at high ISO. I also is superior at high ISO versus the D300s, and it has a native ISO that starts at 100. That is a big advantage, especially when you're using strobe lights or when you're shooting under very bright conditions. So this is something that hasn't really changed with the D7100, but we'll talk a little bit about noise a little bit later. Now, I'm not an expert in movies, but I did take a course on how to use this DCLR for movies, and one of the things that I noticed is that the D7000 had very limited options on what we could do. The D800 had all the options that we needed to accomplish the different things, the different modes on the frames per second. And what I noticed about the D7100 and even the 600 is that it has not only all the modes that the D800 has, but more. So in terms of movies, clearly the D7100 is a big step forward. Okay. The other thing is the monitor size is bigger. The D7100 versus the D7000 is now comparable to the D800 and the D600, and that's always an advantage. Let's see, monitor type. Well, I don't see an advantage. Oh, well, versus the D7000, yes, this is LCD. I don't really know the difference. I do know that when I see my D800, it looks clearer than the D7000, but I don't see much of a difference. So that really, in my opinion, doesn't matter too much. Now, something that I find interesting is that the batteries are all the same, and that's good, because it's not good for the people who own the D300s if you're going, you know, to buy the D7100. But if you had the D7000, then it's the same batteries as the D7100. However, the battery pack is not the same, which I found very disappointing, and it costs a lot more than the battery pack for the D7000. So in terms of dimensions, one of the things that I love about the D7000 is how compact and small it is. When I remove the lens, I carry my D7000 a lot of times as a backup to my D800, and it fits like in the tiniest space in my bag, and it doesn't weigh anything. So, you know, this is one of the things. The D7100, you know, is basically the same size, but it's lighter. Well, it's only 15 grams lighter, but that, believe me, all that adds up. So I would say that I love the fact that they were able to keep the 7100 compact or smaller. In a way, I also appreciate that the height is slightly higher, because sometimes with my hands, I have bigger hands, and that was one of the reasons why I got the battery grip. The D7000 sometimes was too small for my hand. Like if I was holding for a long time, I started feeling, you know, some cramps in my hand. So anyway, let's see what else here is important. Effective pixels, we've talked about that. We already know it's 24. What else? Sensor size. They seem to repeat a lot of the same things. This format change is something that I'm curious about, is because it's not very clear here. So the raw files, as you can see in the D300s, you can set it to uncompress, and the D7000 does not allow you to do that. It's lossless compress, which doesn't have a lot of compression, but it has some compression. Now I'm reading the D7100, and it seems to also have lossless compress, and it doesn't give you the option of uncompress. Now the D800 does give you the option of uncompress. Oh, here it is, uncompress. So that means you cannot go to uncompress. It's really a subtle thing, but you know, if you don't want any compression, it seems like the D7100 won't let you do that. It does have more options than the D7000, but to be honest with you, I shoot RAW, and if I have to shoot JPEG, I really want it to be fine JPEG anyway, and that's pretty standard in all the cameras. So I would say no difference there. The picture control actually seems like the D7000 had more options than the, let's see, standard, vivid. Oh no, the vivid is here. I don't know, I see all the same ones. This one had 9 user customizable. I never use that. And this one has user customizable settings too, so I don't think there's any difference there. Storage, we already talked about the SD cards. You see, this is a little repetitive. So another advantage versus the D300s is that the D300s, oh, I thought the D300s only had one slot, compact flash and an SD. I always thought it was only one. Well, but this one has 2, which is pretty standard now, so that's really good. I'll be curious to know if it allows you. One of the things about the D800 is that it gives you more options on what to do with the second slot. So you can put, for example, pictures in one slot and movies in the other. I'll be curious to see in the 7100 if it allows you to do that. I assume it does, because it's something that it shouldn't be difficult for them to do. Again, it's just a subtle thing. The D7100 is so this is the viewfinder. Since it's bigger, what you see is basically what you shoot. This 100% was an approximate in the D7000. The D7100, at least the horizontal, is 100%, and the vertical is an approximate. But it's the same in the D800, so actually it's just as good as the, you know, the professional D800. Now you see the DX is 97 and 97%, so you have like that box. I assume in the 7100 where you're gonna have that box, you know, kind of like a red box, and it's gonna come off, be like, here is when you go to the 1.3 mode. This viewer magnification, there is no difference between these two. Viewfinder eye point, I don't even know what that is. It's lens compatibility. Well, they're all compatible with the same thing. Here is one thing that a lot of people are upset about the D600, and that's why the D600, if you notice at the beginning, the ratings were not very high. All these cameras can go to 1/8,000 of a second, right? And the D600 only goes to 1/4,000 of a second. And I'm pointing these things out because you may be evaluating the D600 versus the D7100, and obviously there is advantages to going to full frame, especially when you're shooting landscapes and portraits, because you can take more advantage of your lenses. But you know, this is one of the differences that I don't understand why they did that in this, you know, 600. Let's see, all this stuff is, these are the scene modes. You know, these are automatic modes, and they even went to less modes, and this is something I really never use, and I encourage you not to use them, because that's the way, not to learn how to, I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but if you want to learn and master your digital camera, get away from the automatic modes, program modes, or the scene modes. You want to be shooting aperture priority or manual, and you know, even the top professionals shoot aperture priority, so manual is not necessarily, you know, something that you need to do. I happen to shoot manual because I do a lot of studio work, and in that type, you know, in that case you use manual. But aperture priority is what you really want to get yourself used to doing, and then using the exposure compensation, which I noticed there is no difference here, so that's not a now here is one big difference: exposure bracketing. Now some of you are saying, why is exposure bracketing important? It is important when you're doing HDR. Something that bothers me a lot about the D7000 is that you can only do up to 3 frames. Now, one of the good things is that it allows you to do 3 frames, and you can go 2 stops plus, 2 stops minus. In the D7100, they've increased that to 5 frames. I think that's a big difference, because sometimes when you're doing HDR, you do want to go more than 3 frames. The other thing that I love about the D7100 is that it allows you to go up to 3 stops. Look at the D800, you can only go to 1 stop, okay? And this is something that really bothers me, because sometimes I just want to do 3 shots at -2, +2, and I have to take 5 shots because it won't allow me to do that. So I'm you know, very happy that for the D7100 they were able to identify that limitation and fixed it. Okay, so ISO sensitivity, again, it basically shows the D7000 and 7100 shows the same native from 100 to 6400. I can tell you with my D7000 at ISO 1600 was not bad, but then you know, with the D800 I can definitely go to 3200 without a problem. 6400, that's pushing it a little bit. I think if the D7100 is almost as good as the D800, or the profession, that would be a huge win, because the D7000 again had a good ISO, high ISO, manage well the noise for the ISO. If the D7100 is even slightly better, that's going to be huge, especially for people who shoot sports and have to go to a high shutter speed. And basically, in order to get a high shutter speed and a shoot at 4 or 2.8, you have to go to ISO 3200. And if you're shooting a football game, you may have in a high school football game, you may have to go to 3200, and if you're in a concert, you may have to go to 6400. So anyway, this is something that I'm very much curious about, and when I get a chance to test this camera, which I hope I will, I need to convince a couple of stores that I know to see if they let me test it as soon as it arrives, so that I can do real comparisons, apples to apples. Okay, here is the other huge change that they made, and everybody is so appreciative of that, and for me this is kind of like a deal breaker. I mean, this is the type of thing that makes me think that maybe I should move from the D7000 to the 7100. Whenever you do action, these additional focus points, so one of the advantages, and that's why I was torn between the D300s and the D7000, was not only that it had 1 more frame per second, but this autofocus system. The autofocus system of the D300s is really good, and from what I've read, the D7100 has the same one. As a matter of fact, it's superior to the D600, and it's basically the one that the D800 and the D4 have. So this is a big change, okay? And that in the focus modes, they all have the same focus modes. I don't think there is a big advantage here. What I've noticed is that when you use the viewfinder, then the D7100 gives you a lot more options than the D7000. Now what I notice is I use the viewfinder a lot when I'm shooting macros, so these additional options can be useful. It's also probably very useful when you're shooting videos, and again, the way I was taught to shoot videos was actually to do manual focus, but clearly there is an advantage here. It's even an advantage versus the D600, so that's something that is important to consider, especially if you're going to be using the viewfinder a lot for videos. Built-in flash, they all have built-in flash. Now here I also found, let's see, 2 to 3, well in this case the flash bracketing for the D300s seems to have more, but I will tell, I do a lot of flash. As a matter of fact, most of my videos on my website are about speed lights, and this doesn't matter. Nobody's doing, that I know of at least, 9 frames of flash bracketing. I mean, so this is really insignificant in my mind. High speed sync, again, something that I found surprising, and I don't understand why the D600 only goes to 1/4000 of a second, and all the other cameras, even the older D300s, can go to 8000 of a second. I think that's why a lot of D600 users are upset, because they don't understand how can a camera that is supposed to be superior to the D7000 and the D7100, well, the D7100 just came out, how can it be inferior in anything, right? So that just, but anyway, this is not about the D600, this is about the D7100. Flash compensation, they all have, so this is the compensation to increase the power of the flash. This is pretty standard, it doesn't change. The creative lighting system, I'd be curious to know what this advanced wireless lighting, how that works. To be honest with you, and I have videos on that too, the CLS is okay, but I have changed to radio triggers. I use the Pocket Wizard system because the CLS has its limitations because of line of sight, but I'm not going to go into that now, because I have a whole video that shows how the creative lighting system works, and in what situations is limited. But anyway, you know, the good news is that this has the CLS, and it also has this new wireless lighting system. White balance, it has more white balance. It has more white balance. Well, it's the same between, oh, actually it has less white balance features. But to be honest with you, these presets, again, you know, the white balance, what you have here is the same thing that you have in the professional cameras. There's really no difference. Maybe you have more presets. To be honest with you, when I do a preset or a custom white balance, I only have one. So this for me is insignificant. I am a little surprised that, you know, this is the only thing that I found so far where it actually has less options than the D7000, but it's really unimportant completely. Okay, white balance bracketing, it allows you to do 3 shots in steps of 1. I have never done white balance bracketing. I guess if you shoot JPEG, that's something that is useful, but since I shoot RAW, for me that's not important. But you know, again, there is nothing significant here. Live view shooting. So this is interesting. The D7000 says yes. And then the D7100 has photography live view mode and movie live view mode. I really don't understand this because I have both cameras, and in the live view mode I can do movies and I can do photography. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no difference between the D800 and the D7000 or the D7100. But you know, again, you have more options, so that's good. We already talked about all these movie modes. Again, if you're into movies, there seems to be some new advantages to the D7100. As you can see, it's a stereo. This is mono. Here is also mono. People who are serious into video use external microphones anyway. So you can see, so again, I think the D7100 clearly is superior when it comes to video, and all these new cameras are always going to be better and better when it comes to video. Monitor size, we already talked about that. Monitor resolution, there seems to be a big improvement in the monitor resolution even versus the D800. I'll be interested to see what that monitor resolution improvement looks like, but similar monitor type, playback buttons. Okay, so this is something that I would say is important. I can see right now that it has more you know, more things than the D7000, but I don't, the shooting data, I see it in the D7000, I don't see it in the D7100. Again, I'm a little surprised why they eliminated something, but really, what do people use? They use the highlights, the histogram, image comments, that for some people that's important, and that's it. I mean, I don't know what the shooting data, that's all the metadata or metadata, which is in the D7000, and I don't use it, so for me that's not so important. In-camera editing, well, most people don't do in-camera editing, but you know, the newer cameras, they keep adding and adding and adding more things. So look at the D300s compared to the D7100. So that's GPS. Basically the D7100 allows you to use the same GPS units that the D600, but it seems like the GP1 GPS is the one that is common among all of these, so there is no difference here. The batteries we already talked about. Interestingly enough, the D7000 allows you to shoot, you have more shots per battery, and it probably makes sense because the D7100 has a bigger monitor, and it has you know, more resolution on the monitor, so, but it's insignificant. I mean, you know, this is not something. Well, 100 shots you may think it is significant, but the D800 actually has even less shots. So so that's one difference, and that's basically it. So I guess a lot of people probably are thinking, okay, so what do I think about the D7100? I'm still unsure if going from a D7000 to a D7100 is worth it, because that means that you basically have to sell your D7000. You're probably going to get like $700, so it's almost going to be half of what the D7100 is. On the other hand, if you don't have a D7000 and you have a D300 or a D300s, there has been a lot of new technology advances, and you know, it may be worth the upgrade, especially if there is not going to be a replacement to the D300s, and I think that's the big question mark. With the exception of the people from Nikon, nobody knows if there is going to be a D400. But if the D7100 is it, then it may be worth making that jump. Now, a lot of the people who use the D300s have jumped to the professional camera, so a lot of people that I know who use the D300s are going either to the D800 or the D4, or getting a used D3s or D700. So again, the key question here is, let's say you have a D90, right? So what are you going to do, or a D80? So what makes sense to do? I think for me, obviously go for the D7100. I mean, for this price, I mean, under $1,200, and I think I've seen it for $1,100 in some places, maybe I'm mistaken. It's an amazing price for this camera. I mean, this camera has everything that the D7000 has. It has more options than the D600. It has many of the things that the D800 has, and some things that the D800 doesn't even have. And then it has that super crop 1.3 mode, which allows you to, even when you go to the super crop mode, allows you to have a 16 megapixel picture, which is the equivalent of a D7000, and is higher than a crop D800. So this is just an amazing camera, and I think the only thing left to say is, you know, with new cameras, there is always the risk that the first batch may have some few bugs. I mean, when I got my D7000, I was lucky I didn't have any problems. I know a lot of people who had the back focus problems, and hopefully they've done enough testing of the D7100 that that doesn't happen. But even when the D800 and the D600 came out, it also had some bugs and issues that, you know, I believe most of them have been fixed. So thank you very much. I hope you found this useful, and again, I'm in the same boat as many of you in evaluating the D7100, and I promise you that I'm gonna try my best to get one of the first ones to come out and do a side-by-side comparison versus the D7000, you know, and the D800, and even maybe even the D300s. I know a lot of people who have the 3, so maybe I'll do some, you know, take pictures with the same settings, and so you can see the noise and all those different things. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video.